Thank you for inviting me, the organisers, and hello to all delegates and the panel. Hope you had a nice lunch. I'm going to talk about recent finds. Recent, as you may know, in developer-funded archaeology or any other archaeology, should be in inverted commas, but I'm talking about in the last 10 years or so, mostly. But I think Romani British Canterbury is actually a fascinating site. It's getting more and more interesting all the time. The way I'm going to present it is in line with my own preferred story of Romani British Canterbury. It's not the only story. There are plenty of different narratives, particularly amongst Canterbury locals, particularly those who are interested in archaeology and history. But this is the one that I prefer. And this is the one I published on this map. Here's my only plug of the day, the Canterbury Historic Atlas, Historic Towns Atlas map, which was published last year. So I'll see if I can start moving these slides. Let's have a look. Let's do it like this. Yes, excellent, thank you. So I'll just go back actually. If you look across these three images on my opening slide, this one on the right over here, the one with the wall, is the one that tends to dominate still in publications. But actually that only went in 270 to 290. And it had a big impact on the topography of the city thereafter. But if we remove that and we remove some of the other bits and pieces of the second, what I call the second town, we can go back to the first town. And this is where I start here. So I'll just give you a quick overview of my phasing. So Dura Vernum, AD 50 to 110 is what I call the first town. And I'll pick up on a few of these things as we go through. But the main point is that we have a road in from Richborough that crosses over the Stour floodplain and then turns again to the north, on the northwest towards London. And then there's probably a prehistoric route going through and an early road that comes off that road at an angle. And the clue there is that road and a lot of the other things tie in with a pre-existing topography, a late Iron Age topography, which we mainly see through ditch systems that crop up in various excavations right across the valley. And I'll come back to that in a minute. So moving on, after 110, we get, and with the development of Dover, an important port of Dover, we get this new road, which is set out 1,000 Roman feet, as my colleague Simon Pratt has shown, to the southwest, and another road 500 Roman feet in between both of them. And in the latter part of this period, we also get a new theatre built, and the baths, as you can see, get a new wing that lines up with this new system. So the whole thing realigns based on the Richborough Road. That's my viewpoint, and that's where we're going. So, and then after 270 to 290, I'm trying to use my buttons, but I'll use the slide clicker. There we go. We get the wall built around, which cuts off the whole of that northwest side. And focuses the town really differently. Okay, so when you see maps of Roman Canterbury, you might well see this the shape that's in red, which is now the ring road, pretty much the line of the ring road. But actually, as you can see, the topography changed quite a lot during the period. So let's move on. What I'm going to do now is, using these maps, which are the ones from the Historic Towns Atlas map, I'm going to point out where some recent sites have been and tie it into that broad narrative that I was just talking about. So there we go. And I think Blender is going to actually even circumnavigate my yellow points. My yellow points I'm putting on here. Did you hear that, Blender? My yellow points I'm putting on. There she goes. Look, see, that's excellent. Thank you. Superb. This is the Primark excavation for a lift pit done in 2014. And you see it focuses on where it says ditches. This is the late Iron Age, one of the most obvious and well-known late Iron Age features in Canterbury. And we'll see later on that this is now being added to. So this was first seen many years ago in the 1980s when it was excavated in order to create this new Marlow Arcade shopping centre bit of Canterbury. You can see there's the 3 ditches on the left there, and there's an image of one of them on the right. Roundhouses were found within, and latest Iron Age, after 50 BC. So after Caesar was the dating on this. But it's been pointed out by Tim Champion and others, and I would second this, that there's some interesting multiple phasing to this feature, not just to this enclosure, not just in terms of recuts of ditches, but also the fact that we've got 3 ditches as well, and there are recuts to the eave strip gullies of roundhouses too. So the question of pre and post Caesar, to me, is actually a much more interesting one than has been given coverage in the study. So moving on. As you see, there's the excavation in Trench 2 on the left there, came down into the ditch. Yes, thank you, Blender. And the ditch wasn't very clearly seen there, but we did get some deposits. Again, it had latest Iron Age pottery and other objects in there, but it also had, in the deposits, and it is in the later deposits in the ditch, mind you, it also had one of these, and this type of object, a cast coinage of late Iron Age Kent and the Thames area focused, needs to be picked up on more because it's mostly pre-Caesar, and there really is clear evidence, I think, to follow up a clear hypothesis of a pre-Caesarian hegemony joining up Kent and the Thames area. These are the people that lost out through the Caesar episode, and I've been writing elsewhere on this. This is a very interesting group of coins. I suggest you read David Holman's work on this, the numismatist David Holman, who's pointed out the way these are circulating at the same time as the Gallo-Belgic gold coinage. And I think the connection with the Marini, just on the other side of the channel, is especially an interesting thing to follow up. I just wanted to make sure that we're talking about that as well, because pre and post Caesar has big implications for what happens in early Roman Canterbury. Because this is why I put this slide in, up on the hill with alongside Bigbury Hill Fort or Bigbury Camp. We've got lots and lots of evidence now of large-scale features, possible earthworks, enclosures. We've got a new enclosure or a siege camp in Homestall Wood, which is on the other side of the gap in the Downs from Bigbury Camp. And maybe, just maybe, these are the features that are associated with that pre-Caesar situation. And it has long been suggested that Bigbury Camp was indeed the place where Caesar attacked locals, a local stronghold. or it could indeed, looking at that, have been homestall wood. But this is all still out for people to discuss and look into in synthesis in more detail. Right, moving on. So I just wanted to talk about some of the latest Iron Age finds we've been had in recently, which tie in with that narrative. I've put them on the first Roman map, but this is pre AD 50. So look right next to the potential prehistoric route, there's a yellow dot. Blender, you can see that, yes? And that's where we've been having re-excavations recently in a place called the Mint Yard, which is part of the cathedral precinct. And we've got pre-Roman ditches, and it's part of that ditch system. All of the one I mentioned, that the earliest, I believe the earliest form of Roman Canterbury is based on. All of these ditches are all very, very similar, and they're in the same alignments across the whole valley. Yeah, so wherever we find them, it ties in nicely with. So there's a late Iron Age, perhaps an agglomeration in more recent discussion of Iron Age towns, an agglomerated settlement across the valley. And this ditch may well have been cut pre-Caesar, 75 BC, and there are closure deposits in it that are post-Caesar. So that's very interesting, but it's late Iron Age, and there are several of these down at the Mint Yard. Just moving south or southwest, can you see the yellow dot there? Just down here, Blender, can you see it? Yes. She's flying her drone around it. Lovely. So, excavations at Augustine House by my colleague and Richard Helm and all his excellent site staff, of course, recently uncovered a late Roman shrine, which I'll come back to, a late Roman British shrine, and a burial thought to be at the center of this. Well, it is at the center of it, but actually thought to be associated with it, turned out to be much earlier. In fact, at the date range for this inhumation burial, which again ties in with the field system, and in this case ties in with the Iron Age to Romano-British burial mounds in this part of the topography. Turned out to be the date ranges, but crosses over before and after Caesar, which is rather tantalizing. In other words, there's some sort of a center at Canterbury, and its nature before Caesar and nature after Caesar, when I believe Canterbury lost out to the towns that are being talked about, like Camulodunum and Verulamium. The political groups associated with them were the winners in this situation, like Mandubracius making a deal with Caesar. And it's in this early Roman period, Canterbury is a bit slow to catch up. That's my point. So moving on quickly then to the Romano-British phases. I'm currently looking at a new set of Roman buildings, Romano-British buildings we found at the Marlow Theatre area on the other side of the prehistoric route and away from where we usually find the conurbation. So this is rather interesting. And this building had a very interesting history. The key point here, you can see it's got a room with a hypercourse system in it, pili stacks and things. It's also got a beautiful massive wooden threshold that was put into one of the earlier phases. But the key point from this point of view is that there are three masonry phases that may belong to this earliest period, which is very odd. So once again, not only where it is, but the fact that it's so early for masonry buildings, when we usually get mostly timber framed buildings in earliest Roman Canterbury, is of interest. Looking at up to the northwest, looking at the Richborough Road as it's turned towards London, there was an excavation where we thought we might find the other road coming up which is later, but we didn't find it. But we did see the edge of the London Road, and that's on the left of this photograph. You can see the metalled surface, or at least cobbles that formed the foundation for the metalled surface. But please note on the right of the photograph as well, another of those ditches of the Iron Age ditch system all the way up there, and the fact that the Roman road respects it at an interesting distance as well. So it's like it's come across the valley and avoided much of, or it's respected the ditch system and then turned left to head towards London alongside the ditches of the ditch system. At the Beanie Institute, which is the main museum that's left in Canterbury, or we still have a Roman Canterbury museum, I'm pleased to say. At the Beanie Institute, there were excavations there during the refurbishment, and they found the edge of this earliest Roman road. More to the point, interestingly, they also found where the ground had been made up with gravel so that the road could go across the floodplain. This floodplain between the two modern rivers, the ones that are shown, would have been a set, probably braided streams and meanderings going through this time. And the Roman road is made up onto gravel to cross that, at least at the point of the Beanie Institute excavation, which I should show you. There they are. Note how deep they had to go to actually, that's the upper Roman levels that they're dealing with there. We'll come back to that. Now, I see we are moving into the second phase, which I think of the second phase. This is Dura Vernum Cantiocorum proper, in my view, into the Antonine period. And note that it was called Dura Vernum Cantiocorum, and that Cantiocorum is a name given to a group of people from without by Romans. They may have owned to it, they may have taken on that identity, but it's definitely a Roman term for the area, and it means the people of Cantium. So it's rather interesting that what becomes the Civitas capital at this stage, I think, and this is probably when we get the forum and developments of the temple precinct. We saw some of this going on at the Beanie Institute excavations, which are still marked there in yellow. Notice how close they are to the likely location of the forum, which does indeed front onto the Richborough Road, whilst the insula to the southwest is oddly formed because it still has some sort of conservatism towards that earlier alignment. Yeah. Which, given that it's religious and the theatre being tied in with the religious as well, classic Gallo-Roman and Romano-British, I think, set up, that is an interesting aspect, the conservatism of that. They didn't change it to form a new system. Anyway, moving on. The thing that's interesting as well about the Beanie Institute excavations is that they also break the typical linear narrative that used to be applied to Roman towns, because very soon, really after masonry structures were built there in the ambit of the forum area, several, at least one, was repurposed as a kind of souk, or an area where people were making and selling objects. And this was found there, this Cupid intaglio gemstone. And for those of you, I don't know, there might be some here who don't realize that might look a bit crude, but when you look at it on a fingertip, you can see that that's actually a pretty damn decent piece of work going on in the heart of Roman Canterbury. I do find it interesting that what started out as a grand place has become a place for lots of different people to move into and ply their trade in a more of a marketplace. Okay. We've also had very recent excavations right at the heart of the Romano-British Canterbury at its Floruit, and next to the theatre. And at Slatter's Hotel, we knew that there was, we knew it was almost like almost legendary that there was a lump of wool in the cellar of the old Slatter's Hotel, a lump of theatre wool. Well, I'm pleased to say that in the new development, they've made it visible through the floor of the new Hampton by Hilton Hotel, and actually they're very good about letting people go in to see it as well. You can see that the theatre wall they've got in there is for the second theatre, which was built in the late 2nd to early 3rd century, and in my view may well have had something to do with certain visiting emperors, but that's a whole other story. Anyway, what we've got in the Slatter's Hotel excavation are on the right, you can see a metal surface. Note how much, by the way, these Romano-British features are slumping into earlier Iron Age features as well. It's cut, the metal surface that the excavator is cleaning on that right-hand shot has been cut away by an early Anglo-Saxon sunken featured building, but it does allow us to see the section through that, which is quite interesting. And that metal surface seems to have been part of a kind of surrounding forecourt, perhaps, of the theatre. So it's very interesting. On the left, you can see there was another hypocaustic building. Again, notice the slumping going on. Another townhouse to add to our collection. Now I'm going to move forward very quickly to the time when I'm staying with Slatter's Hotel, to the time when they built the wall in 270 to 290, refocusing the town, centre of the town. And one of the really interesting things that came out of this was a load of disarticulated bone in a shallow gully-like ditch, which is in the 4th century, late 4th century. Now, the thing about this as well is it's not the first time we've seen this sort of thing. And there are all sorts of interesting things going on about 350 to 360 in the town, with burnt layers of buildings that have been completely destroyed and then rebuilt on the same site out the spolia of pre-existing buildings and so forth. So it's a very interesting 4th century narrative. And you can see here, this is the same sort of thing we saw in these shallow ditches or in pre-existing drainage ditches. We saw this in the Whitefriars excavation in 2000 to 2001. At the same time, we've also got one of the things that goes on here, as you'll notice, when the wall is built, that means outside the town is now much closer in. So actually the later cemeteries are closer to the centre of town than the early cemeteries. And my colleague Richard Helm and colleagues have been conducting many excavations down in this south area. You'll notice the shrine is marked there that we had a look at. So it's actually a whole landscape here, some of which is published, some of which is being published. You can see the shrine there, the line of the wall up to the northwest. You can see the shrine I was talking about, which has got some exceedingly interesting place deposits, possibly coins hung from the eaves that have fallen down and splayed out in situ, little coin hoards and all sorts of things like that. And that is in the Augustine House publication, which is already out. But we've also got 2 new cemeteries next to a hollow way. This one at Rhodus Town, as it's pronounced, which is just to the northeast of Blender's Pointer, and she goes northeast. See that little square with all the graves in it? That's, yeah, that's it, next to Rhodes Town. That's a plan of this little cemetery, and it's contemporary with the bigger cemetery with all those hundreds of graves, which is on the other side of the Holloway. And we've had some really interesting variants of the, and this is, I'm coming very close to the end now, some really interesting variation in the burial practices of these contemporary cemeteries. So down in the little cemetery, which looks like that, more closely up, there are only about 20 graves, all told. They had amazingly deep grave cuts. And also there's a really interesting burial that covers the entrance, is across the entrance, where the objects within are strongly indicative of witchcraft, if you ask me. That's a whole other fascinating story. Notice this deep burial on the right here, which had between the feet, had an amazing, and as far as we know, unique face pot in it. You see that on a close-up on the right. It's Oxfordshire ware in design, but it's much bigger, and like beaker shape, but a much bigger beaker. You see you have Oxfordshire ware beakers and local imitations and things. Lots of pottery in these burials, right? But the ones over the road, over the Holloway, these many burials here, which are contemporary with the shrine and with that cemetery, there are hardly any grave goods at all. So there's a real difference, a real way of separating people in death. A lot of these burials are in coffins, as you can see from the mandible in some of them. But also, the other thing about these, as well as grave furniture, is that we have our first confirmed decapitation burials from Canterbury as well. And some of these decapitation burials are of child remains as well, which is obviously a fascinating insight into a different culture. Okay, thank you very much. I look forward to your questions if you have any. Thank you.
Thank you, Jake. We are running short on time. Probably we can have one if Jane's had any in.
There's none in the box yet, which is a tragedy because it means I will have to ask my question. Jake, as ever, it's the dead folk I'm really interested in, and it's fascinating to see that distinction between the two cemeteries.
Absolutely.
Have you got any stable isotope or DNA?
Yes,
results?
it's being done. I would advise you to contact Richard Helm direct, who's the project manager. It's coming through to publication hopefully very soon. We have got another contemporary cemetery which is going to be published again soon as well, up on the northwest side, which is just the latest cemetery than those early ones. I think I might have mentioned up there that were further out. It's closer down. It's called the Hallett's Garage Cemetery, and I wrote that one up, and that's got some different aspects about it again. And we've had a younger colleague, Lisa, working on her PhD on all three assemblages from a bioarchaeological point of view at Canterbury Christ Church. We've had isotope analyses done, and there is lots of hope for some DNA stuff. I'm hoping to convince a new colleague at Christ Church who's involved in genome-wide study to get stuck into that, because we've got some interesting people in the Hallett's Garage Cemetery who look like they may be from North Africa, for example. One of whom has a lozenge-shaped hole in the forehead. So it's interesting
Jake,
stuff.
thank you very much indeed. Again, a very interesting contribution, and if there was time, I would certainly come in about the difference between the pre-Caesar and the post-Caesar.
Yeah. Yes,
that is very fascinating, because obviously from the surviving sources, there's a complete change in attitude emanating from Augustus towards Britain.
yes.
He starts off rather like Caesar in terms of potential invasion, and by the end he's saying he doesn't have to. because
Yeah.
we've already submitted to him. Very interesting questions arise from that, which we can't go into now.
No, indeed.
It could
Maybe
be-
another time, yes.
Yeah, indeed, because it could well be seen in somewhere like Canterbury, I think, and indeed others. So, Jake, thank you very much for bringing all that
Thank you.
new information